Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're diving into a novel that's as intricate as it is heartbreaking, The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. If you've ever wondered how history, politics, and personal lives intertwine to create lasting systems of inequality, this book has answers, though it might break your heart in the process. The story is set in post-colonial India and paints a vivid picture of how the caste system interacts with politics and class to entrench inequality and poverty, particularly for low-caste groups. Through its pages, Roy brings us a deeply personal tale of love, loss, and resilience, all while reflecting the weight of larger societal systems. What sets this novel apart isn't just its content, but also its structure. The narrative isn't written in chronological order, so you'll often find yourself piecing together events, working to understand where you are in the storyline. And while the pacing might feel slow at times, trust me, it's worth it. Every moment builds toward a conclusion that's as devastating as it is illuminating. One of the most powerful aspects of The God of Small Things is its exploration of complicity. The novel forces us to confront how systems of power, be it caste, class, or politics, are upheld by collective participation in silence. And here's where Roy's writing truly shines. She doesn't let you stay detached. Starts with the reunion of the parted twins. The story begins and ends with death to characters lost in vastly different circumstances. One is an accident, a moment of misfortune that ripples through time. The other is a deliberate, public act of violence that epitomizes the cruelty of caste-based oppression. Between these bookends, the novel unpacks how these tragedies came to be, peeling back the layers of injustice and heartbreak in a way that's both deeply personal and socially critical. What's striking is how Roy uses language itself to bridge divides. Her prose is poetic yet accessible, breaking sentences into smaller parts, as though to ensure her message resonates with readers across different levels of understanding. It's as if the novel was written for multiple audiences, those within the story's context and those observing it from outside. Ultimately, The God of Small Things sends a clear message. When we are complicit in the dehumanization of others, we lose a part of our own humanity. It's a sentiment that lands with a gut punch, especially as we spend the entire novel loving and rooting for two protagonists, only to have that affection shattered by the events that unfold. This emotional connection to the characters makes the novel's critique of society all the more impactful, leaving readers questioning their own complicity in similar systems. In the midst of all the chaos, there's a moment where love and systemic violence collide, leading to one of the most painful and pivotal scenes in the book. Let me take you there. They woke Vihaitha with their boots. Isthapan and Rahel woke to the shout of sleep, surprised by shattered kneecaps. Screams died in them and floated belly up, like dead fish, cowering on the floor. Rocking between dread and disbelief, they realized that the man being beaten was Velutha. Where had he come from? What had he done? Why had the policeman brought him here? They heard the thud of wood on flesh, boot on bone, on teeth, the muffled grunt when a stomach is kicked in, the muted crunch of skull on cement, the gurgle of blood on a man's breath when his lung is torn by the jagged end of a broken rib. Blue-lipped and dinner plate-eyed, they watched, mesmerized by something that they sensed but didn't understand: the absence of caprice in what the policeman did, the abyss where anger should have been, the sober, steady brutality, the economy of it all. They were opening a bottle, or shutting a tap, cracking an egg to make an omelet. The twins were too young to know that these were only histories, henchmen, sent to square the books and collect the dues from those who broke its laws, impelled by feelings that were primal yet paradoxically wholly impersonal, feelings of contempt born of inchoate, unacknowledged fear, civilization's fear of nature, men's fear of women, power's fear of powerlessness, man's subliminal urge to destroy what he could neither subdue nor deify, men's needs. What Isthapan and Rahel witnessed that morning, though they didn't know it then, was a clinical demonstration in controlled conditions. This was not war after all, or genocide of human nature's pursuit of ascendancy, structure, order, complete monopoly. It was human history, masquerading as God's purpose, revealing herself to an underage audience. There was nothing accidental about what happened that morning. Nothing incidental. It was no stray mugging or personal settling of scores. This was an era imprinting itself on those who lived in it. History in live performance. If they hurt Velutha more than they intended to, it was only because any kinship, any connection between themselves and him. Any implication that if nothing else, at least biologically he was a fellow creature had been severed long ago. They were not arresting a man. They were exercising fear. They had no instrument to calibrate how much punishment he could take, no means of gauging how much or how permanently they had damaged him. Unlike the custom of rampaging religious mobs or conquering armies running riot, that morning in the heart of darkness the posse of touchable policemen acted with economy, not frenzy, efficiency, not anarchy, responsibility, not hysteria. They didn't tear out his hair or burn him alive. They didn't hack off his genitals and stuff them in his mouth. They didn't rape him or behead him. After all, they were not battling an epidemic. They were merely inoculating a community against an outbreak. In the back veranda of the history house, as the man they loved was smashed and broken, Mrs. Epen and Mrs. Rajagopalin, twin ambassadors of God knows what, learned two new lessons. Lesson number 1, blood barely shows on a black man, dumb dumb. And lesson number 2, it smells though, sick sweet, like old roses on a breeze, dumb dumb. Maiadio, one of history's agents, asked. Madia Iricum, another replied. Enough, enough. They stepped away from him, craftsmen assessing their work, seeking aesthetic distance. Their work, abandoned by God and history, by Marx, by man, by woman, and in the hours to come by children, lay folded on the floor. He was semi-conscious, but wasn't moving. His skull was fractured in 3 places. His nose and both his cheekbones were smashed, leaving his face pulpy, unidentified. The blow to his mouth had split open his upper lip and broken 6 teeth, 3 of which were embedded in his lower lip, hideously inverting his beautiful smile. 4 of his ribs were splintered, 1 had pierced his left lung, which was what made him bleed from his mouth. The blood on his breath bright red, fresh, frothy. His lower intestine was ruptured and hemorrhaged. The blood collected in his abdominal cavity. His spine was damaged into places. The concussion had paralyzed his right arm and resulted in a loss of control over his bladder and rectum. Both his kneecaps were shattered. Still, they brought out the handcuffs, cold, with the sorbitol smell, like steel bus rails and the bus conductor's hands from holding them. That was when they noticed his painted nails. One of them held them up and waved the fingers coquettishly at the others. They laughed. What's this? In a high falsetto, AC/DC. One of them icked at his penis with his stick. Come on, show us your special secret. Show us how big it gets when you blow it up. Then he lifted his boot with millipedes curled into its sole and brought it down with a soft thud. They locked his arms across his back. Click and click. Below a lucky leaf, an autumn leaf at night, that made the monsoons come on time. He had goosebumps where the handcuffs touched his skin. It isn't him, Rahel whispered to Esta. I can tell. It's his twin brother, Uramban, from Kochi. Unwilling to seek refuge in fiction, Esta said nothing. Someone was speaking to them. A kind, touchable policeman, kind to his kind. Moan, Maul, are you all right? Did he hurt you? And not together, but almost. The twins replied in a whisper. Yes, no, don't worry. You're safe with us now. Then the policeman looked around and saw the grass mat, the pots and pans, the inflatable goose, the canis koala with loosened button eyes, the ballpoint pens with London streets in them, socks with separate colored toes, yellow-rimmed red plastic sunglasses, a watch with the time painted on it. Whose are these? Where did they come from? Who brought them? An edge of worry in the voice. Esta and Rahel, full of fish, stared back at him. The policemen looked at one another. They knew what they had to do. The canis koala they took for their children, and the pens and socks. Police children with multicolored toes. They burst the goose with a cigarette, bang, and buried the rubber scraps. Useless goose, too recognizable. The glasses one of them wore, the others laughed, so he kept them on for a while. The watch they all forgot. It stayed behind in the history house, in the back veranda. A faulty record of the time. 10 to 2. They left. Dead fish floated up in Esta. One of the policemen prodded. Velutha with his foot. There was no response. Inspector Thomas. Matthew squatted on his haunches and raked his jeep key across the sole of Velutha's foot. Swollen eyes opened, wandered, then focused through a film of blood on a beloved child. Esther imagined that something in him smiled, not his mouth, but some other unhurt part of him, his elbow perhaps, or shoulder. The inspector asked his question. Esther's mouth said yes. Childhood tiptoed out. Silence slid in like a bolt. Someone switched off the light and Velutha disappeared. On their way back in the police jeep, baby Kahama stopped at Reliable Medicos for some calm pose. She gave them to each. By the time they reached Chungam Bridge, their eyes were beginning to close. Esther whispered something into Rahel's ear. You were right. It wasn't him. It was Urumban. Thank God. Rahel whispered back. Where do you think he is? Escaped to Africa. They were handed over to their mother, fast asleep, floating on this fiction, until the next morning, when Amu shook it out of them. But by then it was too late. Inspector Thomas Matthew, a man of experience in these matters, was right. Velutha didn't live through the night. Half an hour past midnight, death came for him. And for the little family curled up and asleep on a blue cross-stitch counterpane. What came for them? Not death, just the end of living. After Sophie Mall's funeral, when Amu took them back to the police station and the inspector chose his mangoes tap, the body had already been removed. Dumped in the Themiti Kazi, the pauper's pit where the police routinely dump their dead. When baby Kahama heard about Amu's visit to the police station, she was tarried. Everything that she, baby Kahama, had done had been premised on one assumption. She had gambled on the fact that Amu, whatever else she did, however angry she was, would never publicly admit to her relationship with Velutha. Because, according to baby Kahama, that would amount to destroying herself and her children forever. But baby Kahama hadn't taken into account the unsafe edge in Amu. The unmixable mix, the innate tenderness of motherhood, the reckless rage of a suicide bomber. Amu's reaction stunned her. The ground fell away from under her feet. She knew she had an ally in Inspector Thomas Matthew. But how long would that last? What if he was transferred and the case reopened? It was possible considering the shouting, sloganeering crowd of party workers that Comrade K. and Pilla had managed to assemble outside the gate. That prevented the laborers from coming to work and left vast quantities of mangoes, bananas, pineapple, garlic and ginger rotting slowly on the premises of Paradise Pickles. Baby Kahama knew she had to get Amu out of Imenam as soon as possible. She managed that by doing what she was best at, irrigating heralds, nourishing her crops with other people's passions. She gnawed like a rat into the go-down of Chaco's grief. Within its walls she planted an easy, accessible target for his insane anger. It wasn't hard for her to portray Amu as the person actually responsible for Sophie Mall's death. Amu and her two egg twins. Chaco breaking down doors was only the sad bull thrashing at the end of baby Kakama's leash. It was her idea that Amu be made to pack her bags and leave, that Esta be returned. And there you have it, a glimpse into one of the most powerful and heart-wrenching parts of the God of Small Things. We've made our best attempt to cover this section, considering the novel's non-linear structure, but if it's left you curious or emotional, that's exactly what Arundhati Roy intended. This story doesn't follow typical narrative order, and that's part of what makes it so unique and impactful. There's much more to explore, and I truly encourage you to dive deeper into this unforgettable world. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more literary dives. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.